Night. It's actually about 8:30. I'm a little bit late tonight. Father Rob Arsenault, Annunciation of the Lord Parish here in Ottawa, and it's time for the Pastor's Chat. This is, again, time I come online. I just talk about what I'm thinking about or things that are going on in the parish and in the world, and just kind of share that with you, and then kind of invite. I've actually been a little bit surprised. A number of people have been mentioning that they do watch me, often later, not necessarily live. So I'll keep doing this, and I'll keep putting these ideas out there and some thoughts. So tonight I'm getting together to do a talk. We have a thing coming up in just a little over a week, something called Unlocked. And Unlocked is a conference that we're running here in the parish. It's really for the whole diocese, and even it's gotten some parishes from outside the diocese. It's put on by Divine Renovation, a young man named Eric Myatt and Ed. Ed is he does Alpha for Canada. They're the main people, and I think CCO is also going to do it. I think Holly's going to do a talk on leadership as well. So it's a bit of a combination of a number of different organizations that do base evangelization, and it's an opportunity for parishes who are thinking about this and are kind of serious about it to come together. And it's always a good little networking time. And then from there to kind of think, okay, what are we going to do? How do we change the trend? Now, what trend? What are we talking about here? Well, a number of times I've talked to you about something called a life cycle or growth ring or growth cycle. And it's I forget the name. There's actually someone's got a name attached to that. It's a theory of how organizations usually begin with an idea at a time of growth, a plateauing, and then it's sort of a general decline, and then kind of complete decline to complete death. And that's just a cycle, and it goes through all organizations really face this, and even though it might renew in some new way, there's a life cycle to this, right? To any organization or any phase or time of an organization. Now, the church has been around for 2,000 years. Well, it's kind of done the same thing. It oscillates. There are times when it has grown tremendously, and times that it has gone to decline. I think sometimes like the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, there's still things happening in the church, but it was not near what it was or what it became or what it returned to. The best example I've ever heard of this is Kodak film. Kodak actually invented, almost could say invented. They didn't invent photography, but the whole idea or concept of recreational photography. I think really coming out of the beginning of the last century, where they would mail you film for what's called sometimes a box camera, a very simple camera. And people could take pictures on their own. They didn't need a professional photographer. You didn't need that huge box with the flash thing. You could do that on your own. And then you would seal up the film and mail it back to Kodak. They would develop the film, and then they would mail you back your pictures. It's really quite remarkable. Now, it would take probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month. But you could do it, and any person generally could afford it and could do this. And really the explosion of photography in the 40s, 50s, 60s, this is sort of its origins. Now, they were actually the ones that developed digital film. They really came around, first very crude versions of it, but they were the ones that actually developed digital film. And they had, I don't know who this famously happened at a meeting or something and said, well, what are we going to do with this? And their conclusion was that nobody really wanted digital film. People wanted pictures. It's come from, I talked about this morning in my homily, kind of bias conviction. They were just so enamored with their little photographs and mailing it back to people. And if you remember back in the 80s, these little booths were everywhere you could do this. It had been a bit more refined, but they just didn't see it coming. They just thought people wanted pictures. And so they didn't really develop much more this notion of digital cameras. And that's about the time that cell phones were coming along, and even more smartphones. And so other people took that technology and took it to a whole new level, to the point that Kodak really is out of business now. It went from being one of the most, the great idea. They developed this amazing kind of program, missed the curve when it was happening, and then just didn't see it coming. And now they're out of business. I mean, they did because you had a good run. It put 60, 70 years. But it just think that they should have caught that next rung and got into digital film. Now, it's easy to, for us looking back, everybody's got a cell phone or smartphone now, and it's really taken over our culture. And to say that they should have seen that maybe is a little unfair. But that's the whole thing, is to know where you are on that curve. And so what I think we're experiencing in our church, I've talked about it before, it's sort of the end of Christendom. Like the notion that the wider culture supports what we do, and most people are Christian, or sometimes Judeo-Christian ethics. We talk about that, so Jewish and Christian ethic, and the belief in a single God, and a sense of the nature of that God in a personal way, is one that kind of informs most of the Western culture, and much of science and any kind of arts and music and architecture all kind of draw from that and are affected by it. Now you can argue how much or should they have, but I think that's pretty fair. And we just kind of assumed, I think, or maybe we had assumed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Vatican II and some of the turmoil around that, but it was just going to keep growing. We were the dominant part of the culture. We would have influence on the culture, and eventually that would just continue, and it would just grow, grow, grow. Well, it didn't. I don't know why. Well, mass media, relative affluence. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But what we see is sort of this notion, at least in the West, of a Judeo-Christian ethic, and then laws and privileges. Even democracy, you could argue, is really kind of rooted in one person and the value of a person. Education, hospitals, all those things are really kind of Christian ideas. It kind of plateaus and begins to decline. That we don't need it anymore. I think this sort of, television and science and sort of a new kind of modernism. Like we just don't need religion. We have medicine and we have technology, and these things are going to save us. And that's really kind of in a pretty sharp decline. And so if you have a church that still functions kind of as if it was still Christendom, like people are just going to come to church and they're going to pay for it, and then more people will come, and then we'll just have more churches. Like, well, why? If people have not come to experience Christ in their life, if they've not come to experience something of his joy, something of his peace, his healing, there's nothing really that makes them come. And frankly, I'm not surprised that people are surprised. Like that's kind of how it is. And we're certainly experiencing that, generationally, from maybe when I was young to, where Father Kevin's generation to even younger generations. And the good news, though, here is that there's a second curve beginning. You see, as one curve sort of comes to its logical and maybe inevitable decline, there's a new one that begins. And then the trick in business or in science, or maybe in, if you're into history or trends, is to catch that wave. You think of Amazon, got this idea that we could do shopping from home and use the internet as a medium. Well, that worked out pretty well. Some of the things, this like he caught the new trend when the big box stores and the malls were basically in decline. So if we're going to be a church, what's the new trend? Now, when I do this new trend, I often make a nice swiffy line here, and it's easy to follow. So I don't know if it's that defined yet. That's the interesting part. Some of us, if it depending on who you are, you might have had an experience of something like World Youth Day. I've been in fields, like, and the last one I went to was in Germany, and there was 1.7 million people celebrating Mass with the Pope. I mean, that's obviously something. That was bigger than any kind of music festival or even any sports event. It was a massive thing. So that's pretty cool. So maybe that's somewhere here, and they just finished Rise Up, 500 young people in Calgary. That's pretty cool. We've had a number of young people here in the parish training for Net Ministries. They're heading out to their second phase on the road. And again, that's another little dot. And kind of like when you're plotting some kind of a mathematical curve, you see the dots and you start to put them together and say, well, wait a minute, what if it is more about alpha, base evangelization, and where people are presented the gospel in a clear and credible way, and then are prayed with to some experience of it. Remember, I talked about proclamation and demonstration. It's Encounter Ministries is another one of these dots that's on this new trend. Encounter Ministries is very much about that, where you really spend time with people, you pray with them, and you give them not just an idea of God or a lesson about God, but an experience of God, a sense of healing, a sense of something moving in their life. So those are really interesting trends. And again, onesies and twosies aren't so impressive, but when you start to see 10, 15, 20 of these things happening, and movements like, Companions of the Cross, was seen as a new way of priests living together and ministering together to be more effective in evangelization and renewal of parishes. So I just thinking, even our own parish, we're very blessed here. We have, Net is sort of part of us. They certainly work through us. The head office isn't too far away, and the director and is a parishioner, and his wife is going to work here, Laura, and CCO, like the founders are here, and a number of CCO families that make this their home, and they come up with this sort of idea of what evangelization could look like. And Companions of the Cross, we've been here now in this parish for, I think Father Eve came here, so it's been almost more than 10 years. So you're getting up into about 12 or 13 years. And it takes time, but this sort of notion of presenting the gospel in a clear and credible way, in the charisma sometimes, or the core, and then demonstrating that with the music. It's the transcendentals, the new artwork, the music, the fellowship, the successful alphas that we've been running. Not any one of these is the answer, but you put enough of those together, and you start to get a bit of a trend that there's a new thing happening. I've shared with you before this idea of new rain, or early rain, or first rain. It's a beginning of a new thing that seems to be moving in people's lives. I can't always define it exactly for you because it's a little tricky sometimes to get your head around. But I'm seeing renewal in people, and I think an excitement and a willingness to try to share the gospel in ways that we just hadn't seen, at least not as much before, or it was a little bit less effective. So the question is then, how do we get off of this downward curve and start to move into this upward curve? Well, you have to try different things. Like I say, it's not this easy, clear line that's obvious sometimes. It's trying new music. It's investing in the artwork. It's having, we had ice cream social in the middle of winter last weekend, and it was very well. I thank you for the people that were doing that. But it created more opportunity for those who have been through Alpha to talk to some other people about maybe taking an Alpha. We're kicking off our Alpha tomorrow night, and again, we think we have 50 people coming. We thought it would be quite a bit smaller because we're running 2 of them in the same year, but we seem to have almost as many as our last one. And we're not done yet. Who knows? We could still pick up another 10 people. If you're interested in Alpha, please, come next, tomorrow night, Thursday night, and see what it's all about. So all of that to put together is quite hopeful. This is really what the diocese is doing as well with its vision statement I've been talking about, and been a part of that. And next week, I'm going to be with the Companions of the Cross, and we're going to do our kind of our quarterly, but it's a almost long-term planning where we're starting to ask these bigger questions. We've been blessed with a number of seminarians, and we have 4 guys being ordained this year, and 3 more next year. It's 7 new priests for our community. We have 5 or 6 different foundations. But what are we going to do with that? And what do we want to try to see as in this next curve, this new and improvement, this new possibilities in church planting and other things like that. So all pretty exciting. Now it's new and it's tender. As I say, it's not a clear line. It's more of dots. And you start to put the line in between it and say, I think it's over here, but there's a bit here and there's a bit here. But overall, I think it's hopeful. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep believing that God isn't done with us yet, that we're not at the end of this curve, but we're really the beginning of a new one, and that much is possible in this world. So I hope that makes sense to you. I know that was a bit of a ramble. I'd say I was a bit late getting on tonight, so I had just a half a thought in my head. But think about that. What do you see in the church now, and maybe in the liturgies or in what we're doing that seems to be bearing fruit? And sometimes it's our effort. Sometimes I think it's just God's grace. But there does seem to be a new openness among people in general, and I think particularly young people. I find it very hopeful. This Gen Z seems to be a little more open to what we're doing. They're open to a lot of things, but I think they're open to the faith as well. Let's continue to reach out to them. Let's continue to kind of pray for them, that they would be able to experience God in a new and meaningful way. Well, good friends, there we go. There's my ramble for tonight. So a bit late, but it's out there. So give me a thought, Feel free to comment, or if you want me to talk about some other stuff or more of the same, let me know, and I'll try to do my best. Joseph, thanks for chiming in, and take care. May the good Lord continue to watch over you, guide you, protect you. May the saints and angels watch over you, and a blessed mother wrap you in the mantle of her peace. If I could bless you, keep you now. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.